Here's a number that sounds fine until you sit with it. The average retired worker in America collects about $2,080 a month from Social Security. Call it $25,000 a year. And for roughly 1 in 5 people over 65, that check is 90% or more of everything they live on. So for millions of Americans, retirement isn't a beach or a porch or a slower Tuesday. It's arithmetic that doesn't add up. Being too poor to retire isn't a personal failing. It's a math problem the system quietly built in decades ago. Start with a strange fact. Retirement, the way we picture it, is barely 100 years old. For most of American history, there was no such thing as stopping work. You labored until your body gave out, and then you leaned on your children, a church, or a county poorhouse. Old age and poverty were nearly the same word. That changed in 1935 when the government created Social Security, a federal program that takes a tax out of your paycheck while you work and pays you a monthly benefit once you're old enough to claim it. But here's the part people forget. Social Security was never meant to be your whole retirement. It was built as a floor, something to keep you off the street, not to fund 30 years of leisure. On its own, it replaces only about 40% of what a typical worker earned before. So how is the rest supposed to get covered? For a few decades, the answer was a pension, a promise from your employer to pay you a set amount every month for life. Add your own savings on top, and you had what planners like to call the three-legged stool: Social Security, a pension, and personal money. Then one leg got sawed off. Starting in the late 1970s, companies began trading pensions for a new kind of account, the 401k. Named after a line in the tax code. Instead of the company promising you a check for life, you put in your own money and hope the market did the rest. The risk slid off the company's books and onto yours. And for anyone who couldn't spare much to save, that stool got very wobbly. So what does retirement actually cost? Not the vacation kind, the basic kind, keeping a roof up, the lights on, and food on the table once the paychecks stop. Studies of household spending put a modest retirement somewhere around $50,000 to $60,000 a year for a couple, less for a single person, more if you're renting or paying for care. Now hold that next to the income most people bring in. The average Social Security benefit, again, lands near $25,000 a year. Financial planners say you generally need about 70 to 80% of your old paycheck to keep your standard of living. Social Security replaces roughly 40%. That gap, the difference between 40% and 80%, is supposed to come from savings. Here's where the picture gets uncomfortable. The financial industry throws around big round targets, save 10 times your salary, hit $1 million, and so on. Reality looks nothing like that. By one recent survey, the typical retiree household has around $126,000 saved, and that's the typical one. Plenty have far less. Other surveys suggest only about half of retirees have any dedicated retirement savings at all. And be careful with that word typical. There's a big difference between the average and the median. A handful of very wealthy retirees pull the average way up, which makes the whole country look better prepared than it is. The middle household, the true midpoint, has far less than the averages suggest. So when a report says the average American has some comfortable-sounding nest egg, it's often describing almost nobody. Do the math on $126,000, spread across a retirement that might last 20 or 30 years, it doesn't throw off much income. A few $1,000s a year, if you're careful, which means that for a huge share of older Americans, Social Security isn't one leg of the stool, it's the whole stool. The pension leg is gone, the savings leg barely exists, and the floor that was designed as a minimum is now holding up the entire house. That's why so many people simply don't stop. Working past 65 used to be the exception. Now, for a lot of Americans, it's the retirement plan, not because they love the job, but because the numbers leave no other door. To see why so many people arrive at old age with so little, follow the money through two very different systems. The first is Social Security itself, and it works in a way that surprises people. The taxes taken out of your paycheck today don't go into a personal account with your name on it. They go straight out the door to pay this month's retirees. Today's workers fund today's grandparents. Tomorrow's workers will fund you. It's a chain, not a piggy bank, and it only holds together as long as there are enough workers paying in. The second system is the private one that grew up where pensions used to be, and this is where the real money gets made. When companies swapped pensions for 401k plans and IRAs, individual retirement accounts you open yourself, they handed trillions of dollars in savings over to Wall Street to manage. And managing that money is a business. Fund companies take a small percentage every year, whether the market goes up or down. A fraction of a percent sounds harmless. Stretched across decades and millions of accounts, it adds up to one of the most reliable profit streams in American finance. The bigger the pile of retirement money grows, the bigger those fees get, which is why a handful of giant firms now sit on top of the nation's savings. Here's the quiet part. That shift didn't just move risk from employers to workers, it moved cost too. The old pension was the company's problem to fund and manage. The 401k is your problem. And every dollar of fees you pay is a dollar that doesn't compound into your retirement. For high earners who fill up their accounts, the system works reasonably well. For everyone living closer to the edge, there's often nothing left over to put in. So there's nothing for the fees to eat and nothing to grow. And around the outer ring, an entire secondary industry feeds on the shortfall. Reverse mortgages that let cash-poor homeowners borrow against the house, high-interest lenders, credit aimed squarely at people on fixed incomes. When the money runs short at the end of life, someone is always ready to sell you a way to stretch it for a price. So when someone genuinely can't afford to retire, who actually pays the bill? The order matters. First in line is the person themselves. They keep working or they shrink their life down to whatever the Social Security check covers, or both. Then comes Social Security as the floor, and for all its limits, that floor does enormous work. Without it, the poverty rate among Americans over 65 would jump from about 1 in 10 to nearly half. Social Security is the single biggest reason old age and poverty are no longer the same word. Below that floor sits a second, less familiar one, Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. This is not the same as Social Security, and the difference matters. Social Security is money you earned through a lifetime of payroll taxes. SSI is a safety net payment funded out of general taxes for people who are old or disabled and have almost nothing. In 2026, it tops out at $994 a month for an individual, and the average check is closer to $740. To qualify, you have to be genuinely broke. Then there's Medicaid, and be careful here, because it's easy to mix up with Medicare. Medicare is the health insurance almost every American gets at 65, no matter how rich or poor. Medicaid is the program for people with very low income, and it's the one that actually pays for long-term care. So a poorer retiree often ends up leaning on both. Medicare for the doctor, Medicaid for the nursing home. For the ones who slip between the cracks, the fixes are smaller and harder. Food assistance to stretch the grocery budget, selling the house and renting a room, picking up part-time work at 70 or 75, bagging groceries or driving, not for spending money, but for rent. The paid-off home, the one asset a lifetime built, often becomes the last thing sold to cover the years the income wasn't enough. And when the government programs still aren't enough, the last payer is family. Adult children who send money or move a parent in or quietly cover the gap. Their help doesn't show up in any budget line, but it's real and it's enormous. When someone is too poor to retire, the cost doesn't disappear. It just spreads out across the individual, the taxpayer, and the next generation down. Now for the costs that never make the headline number, start with a small, brutal detail. To qualify for that SSI safety net, a single person can own no more than $2,000 in countable savings. That limit was set in 1989 and has never been raised. Think about what 1989 money is worth today. The rule effectively punishes the poorest seniors for saving even a little. Cross $2,000 and you can lose the benefit. It's a trap that keeps people pinned to the floor. Then there's inflation. A fixed income feels fixed until you notice that rent, groceries, and medicine don't hold still. Social Security does get a cost of living bump most years, but the things older people buy most, especially healthcare and housing, tend to rise faster than the average. Every year, the same check quietly buys a little less. Housing is its own hidden cost. The classic retirement plan assumed a paid-off home, but a growing share of older Americans still rent or still carry a mortgage, and rising rents hit hardest exactly when income stops. Add in out-of-pocket medical bills. The reason poverty among seniors looks worse once you count what they actually spend on health, and the squeeze gets tighter. And more people now carry debt into old age than a generation ago. A mortgage, a car loan, even credit card balances all still due after the last paycheck ends. And then there's the cost that lands mostly on women. A lifetime of lower pay, plus years taken out of the workforce to raise kids or care for aging parents, means smaller lifetime earnings, which means a smaller Social Security check and less saved. The unpaid caregiving that holds families together often shows up decades later as one more older woman living alone on too little. The bill for that care was always being paid, just never in cash. Step back and the logic snaps into focus. None of this is an accident. It's the predictable result of choices about who carries the risk. The whole structure runs on one assumption that people have spare income to save. Tax breaks for 401k plans and IR as reward exactly that behavior. But those breaks are worth the most to people in high tax brackets with money to set aside and worth almost nothing to the worker who has nothing left at the end of the month. The system quietly does the most for those who need it least. Meanwhile, the shift from pensions to personal accounts was a great deal for two groups: employers who shed a huge, long-term obligation, and the financial industry, which gained decades of fees. The risk that used to sit with big institutions now sits with individuals, one household at a time. Now point that system at demographics. About 11,000 Americans turn 65 every single day. People are living longer, and there are fewer workers paying in behind them. That's why Social Security's main trust fund is projected to run short around 2032. If Congress does nothing, benefits could automatically drop by roughly a fifth, which would push more people below a line that's already too close. Other countries make different bets, from universal pensions to required savings, each with its own trade-offs. America bet on the individual. For millions, that bet didn't pay. So the central question, can Americans afford to retire? For a lot of them, honestly, no. Not in the way the word suggests. Here's the fair version. Social Security does close to exactly what it was designed to do. It keeps tens of millions of older people out of poverty, and it's the most effective anti-poverty program the country has. The problem isn't that it fails. The problem is that it was built as one leg of three, and for millions, the other two legs never showed up. A minimum floor became the entire structure. Who wins in this arrangement? The employers who traded away pensions and the industry that earns steady fees on everyone else's savings. Who pays the difference? The workers who never had enough left over to save and the families and taxpayers who catch them at the end. Being too poor to retire isn't really about bad personal choices. It's about a system that promised a floor, quietly took away the walls, and then handed each of us the blueprint and wished us luck. In America, retirement was never a right you aged into. It's a balance you either built or didn't. If this breakdown helped the money make a little more sense, consider liking and subscribing. We follow the dollars behind growing older in America, one system at a time.